Hi everyone, I thought this week we would answer some questions from you. So there've been questions on vibrato, on of course, what is your shoulder rest? Oh my goodness, so many people ask me that question. And it's sort of questions and answers that I think will be relevant to a lot of people. So we decided to do a little video answering them. So I have them here. First question is, do I have warm-ups for arms, muscles and fingers? Now I would direct you straight over to Elena Urioste, who I mentioned in the very first video, and she recorded a kind of warm-up for all of your muscles. So we will link that below to this video too. I do basic warm-ups, like I have sort of stretches that are kind of opening out my arms. I try to get the blood inside my fingers, so I'm sort of doing this type of thing. I have pretty overly sensitive wrists and also hands, like all kinds of things can go wrong with my arms and wrists and hands far too easily, so I have to be careful, but doing kind of gentle things that Elena talks about all this much better than me, so definitely go and watch her videos. I do things like this, and then a little bit the other way. I definitely like open out my arms this way and that way, rotate my wrists round. I don't know if maybe I have like a blood circulation problem, but I tend to find, especially if I'm at all nervous or stressed or underslept, no blood goes to my hands whatsoever. They get cold and very stiff. So I kind of hug yourself, but you do it like quite like this, so it gets blood flowing. I think Elena does that too, actually. Oh my goodness. It gets blood flowing to the end of your fingers. Sometimes I'm so desperate that not sometimes, regularly, I just put my hands in pretty warm water. And I also take with me everywhere a hairdryer, because I get really cold really easily, and especially, like I said, if I'm nervous or tired, which is, the tiredness is common. Okay, overcoming left hand squeeze when vibrating. That's a really excellent question, and it's very hard for me to really answer without seeing what you're doing. So send in videos, let me see what you're doing with left hand, because then I can react to that better. I definitely have sometimes an issue with squeezing with my thumb and this getting a little bit tense. I also sometimes get tired. Whatever muscle I use to vibrate, somehow this muscle gets tired. I've never come across anybody else in the world that has that problem, but I definitely do. If you check all your angles, so actually start experimenting with things that are very different to what you're currently doing. So if you're getting fatigued and you feel like you are squeezing, absolutely check everything from how your shoulder is sitting to, is your like elbow supporting the position enough. Try out a bunch of different positions of the thumb. It's totally free for all. It's up to you how you hold the violin while you're vibrating. So try maybe something that's a little bit more underneath the neck of the violin. Try something that is perhaps like a little bit of a more like how you would grab hold of something. Just experiment with how the hand grips, but go back to the most basic things of your hand position rather than purely worrying about how and why you're squeezing while you're vibrating. Overcoming violin shake when vibrating. This is something that I try not to overcome, but try to work with, because my violin does move around a lot when I'm vibrating. So I don't try to like think of that as a problem and try to kind of put the lid on that. I just go with the movement of the violin. That said, if the violin is shaking too much, you're probably just using too big emotions. So a lot of what we talked about with vibrato was isolating this movement. And if you have quite a secure shoulder position, if where the violin sits around here is comfortable enough, then even if you're doing a more kind of arm vibrato, it shouldn't be moving around too much. So I would say make sure that this is feeling good and secure, and if it's not, then address that. And if the violin is shaking too much, maybe just isolate the movement. So focus a little bit more on the hand rather than using so much of the arm. Okay, so somebody has asked me about the challenge of the violin sounding different to the player versus what the audience hears. And I think this is a really interesting question, but it's a futile pursuit, because even if we watch a video of ourselves or hear a recording of ourselves, we don't experience anything outside of our body. And if you look at it a little bit more holistically, that's something to certainly embrace rather than fight against. That said, you want to sound as good as possible and you want to improve as much as possible. So unless it is particularly negative for you to hear recordings of yourself, if you can deal with listening back to yourself and you find that you can take that critique, which is going to be the most honest critique ever, and work out what you don't like and adjust what you're doing in accordance to those recordings, it's like the biggest lesson ever. But do bear in mind that when you are listening back to recordings, the majority of the time it's not taking in a fair way the ambience of the room. It's not taking into consideration the distance that is almost always the experience of you to the audience. There's a distance there that is often not as harsh as recordings you hear of yourself. You do want to develop an awareness of what is being sent out to the audience. A good way to do that is care. I hate to say that, but if you're really concerned with what is out there, when you're practicing, you can't just practice for yourself. And this is something that I see a lot. People are not fully cognizant or focused on how they're translating their message to strangers, to other people. They're so focused inside of their experience, and practicing is so solitary and can be so isolated that we don't actually step out of that almost self-serving and self-critical experience enough to imagine what are we actually giving to somebody that's 10 feet away or further. So I think to force yourself to have a continued awareness of the fact that you're playing for others and you're trying to send out a message to others, that is the first step. Now, I'm saying that based on so many experiences of seeing people in masterclasses, a lot of people in concerts too, so unbelievably shut off from us. Me being an audience member, I'm kind of standing there feeling like saying, hi, I'm here. You're forgetting about me, because they're just so incredibly inside their own world. So I would say that would be your first step to improving your connection between what you hear and what others hear. Then perhaps go into using recording devices, any chance you get to have something filmed or recorded so that you actually gain a better perspective of what's out there. It will no doubt force you to improve a lot of things that you don't like about your playing that you just can't gain perspective on when you're so close to your sound. What is on my bow? I'm guessing what you mean is the kind of plaster looking thing that's on my bow. It's just there to keep everything in place, because I have been on a continuous tour and my bow, the material on it has just been rubbed off. So it's just to stop me actually being cut by the metal binding, which has been happening quite a lot. So it's like self-adhesive plaster of sorts. How to take the relaxation tips onto the stage. First of all, start preparing early for the fact that you're most likely to be nervous, and embrace that. Don't lie to yourself. Then put yourself in a bunch of circumstances that have a bit of pressure, but there's no consequences to something going wrong, and force yourself to be ultra relaxed and trusting. The other thing is to do away with this kind of barrier that seems to sit between so many musicians, especially many classical musicians, and the audience. There's like a line there that makes us terrified of those strangers out there. Try to force yourself to develop an imagination that crosses between your space on stage and the audience, and recognize that they're just people. They want to have a good experience. They want you to do as well as possible. And if you try to break through that barrier into a sense of familiarity and also conversation, like you're trying to say something to them and imagine they're reacting to you. You need a lot of like focus on your imagination to really develop this, but it is such a useful tool to staying physically, mentally, emotionally more open and free and relaxed in a, let's face it, pretty pressured environment. How do I prepare before a concert? I try to prepare as early as possible. That's sometimes doesn't happen, but I do try. In terms of the immediate preparation before a concert, I try to be rested enough. I try to get ready, like as in ready in my concert clothes, at least 40 minutes before I'm playing. It's just something that I've got into the habit of doing. And then I just have to be warm. So I will like make sure that the room is warm if I possibly can, and if it's not warm, then I just run my hands under warm water. Then basically what I'm doing is like the most random and seemingly nonsensical combination of, I don't have a routine, I don't have exercises I do. What I'm trying to do is feel at one with my instrument and get to a point in my mind and in my body where I'm feeling more like this, like I'm ready to share something with you. And I can't be all that more specific about that because it's total chaos in my mind and in like my backstage thing. I'm just trying to align the millions of bits of like information and thoughts and concerns that can go through your head before a concert. I'm trying to just kind of focus them all together. And sometimes it works great, sometimes it works less well, but that's basically what I'm trying to do. It's a bit chaotic. Bow shakes when nerves kick in. I have never suffered from bow shakes, but I know a lot of people that do. Breathing, breathing, breathing. You have to breathe not in the upper part of your breath, but in the lower part of your breath. So like, we tend to like breathe up like this. If we're stressed or nervous, you have to, even if it makes you feel like you're going to be sick, push your breath down. Like you go to like the middle of your breath and then like expel all of your breath. And then put your breath into your bow. So everything I've been talking about, things like sinking into the string, things like pushing and pulling. One of the things that I talk about in the bow distribution section is a type of bow distribution that inspires confidence. So things like bow shakes, that type of exercise is perfect for somebody that experiences bow shakes if they're stressed or nervous, because what you're doing is just freeing everything up in the right hand. Before you go on stage, do not keep yourself internal. Try to become an extrovert. So when you're warming up, do wild, kind of very demonstrative and confident motions. Even if you feel terrified and you feel like this, you feel small, you feel nervous, you feel cautious, act as somebody who is none of those things. Force yourself to be an actor or an actress in that moment and just be bold. And I'm talking about backstage, preferably when nobody else is watching. Be bold and just force yourself out of that sense of fear. All of these things will definitely help bow shakes. And also, I don't think a bow shake every now and again is all that bad. Like sometimes I do it kind of on purpose because I like the sound of like some kind of really intense vibrato, or like you're just resolving to a certain note and it's a very tender moment and your bow shakes a little bit. It's like another version of vibrato. Don't fear it too much. It will only get worse if you fear it. And also have a sense of humor. That helps. Somebody asked me about my strings. They are predominantly Pirazzi strings, but that's covered in more detail in the equipment video. Somebody's asked about a process, idea, and exercises for developing arm vibrato for those who have an entrenched wrist. That's a very good question, and I guess it's something I'll have to come back to in more detail. But actually all of the exercises that are rhythmic exercises that isolate the hand, you can apply those types of rhythms to a fairly kind of fluid and controlled movement that is guided by the arm. So even things like I was saying, like what I'm thinking of when I'm doing those exercises are to control so that it's not bumpy, to control the motion so that it sounds like very smooth. If you want to engage the arm and you're not really able to kind of free up this, all of those types of exercises can apply, but utilizing the arm. So you just kind of you're utilizing this and you're kind of pulling out and pushing back in. You don't want obviously a protruding wrist too much. I think all those exercises apply, but that's a really good question and we should definitely come back to that at some point. How these lessons apply to viola, to traditional playing and to other string instruments too, it's so personal and dependent, but I would say the majority of the exercises focus enough on the basic fundamentals of your physicality for them to be applicable to viola. Cello is obviously such a different formation, but a lot of the same principles apply. When it comes to traditional playing, I am not an expert on that, so I would ask Ali Bain or Duncan Chisholm or Mark O'Connor.